The amazing thing about the mushrooms is that they speak. They talk to you. They will answer questions, carry on conversations. Psilocybin just pulls up a chair on the porch and puts its feet up.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. I'm Eric Osborne. If you didn't know, if this is your first time with us, well, welcome. We're still wrapping up the introduction to the new format. As I spoke, we're going to be going in topical chapters. We got lots of great episodes already recorded and lined up for our first two chapters, but this one is going to finish off our introduction. The guest on this episode is someone who I have long wanted to sit down and record a conversation with. He goes by Alex, just Alex for this, and he is one of the most incredible questioners, one of the most powerful ponderers that I've ever experienced. From the first time we met, I just thought, man, this guy really needs to share his way of thinking with the world, because I really believe that the quality of our life in so many ways is connected to the quality of the questions that we ask about our lives. And so I wanted to have Alex on to ask me some questions about Psilocybin Says, about this work. And he really came through. He asked some incredible questions. He got some stuff out of me that, again, I didn't think was going to come out, but I'm really grateful to share it with you all because, well, we live in a pretty amazing world, and it is one big mystery. And we explored a little bit together in this show. So I really appreciate all the positive feedback that we got back from the last episode. You know, this is just getting started. There's going to be some bumps along the way, still kind of fumbling a little bit with some audio visual stuff, but it's all good. I so appreciate you just being here with us and getting to see the growth. You know, I think there's some real value in watching a thing develop. And that's something I've always been, just not afraid to do, is to grow in front of people. We all make mistakes. We're all just kind of fumbling through the dark here. And I'm not really very afraid to let you know that I am too. So please help me increase the exposure to this content. The stuff that we've got coming is going to be so powerful, and it's going to provide such a different use, I think, value to the psychedelic experience, the psychedelic community. So share it, comment it. I'd love to see some thoughts on the YouTube feed. If you are have some similar experiences, or if you have questions for me, please feel free to put those in the comment section, and I will do my best to get back to you. Aside from that, I just think you're in for a really, really wonderful conversation with an incredible human being. And isn't that the thing, though? Like, how many millions of amazing people are just out there plugging along every day? And man, I really like highlighting that. So thank you, Alex, for coming on the show. Thank you, listeners, for being a part of it here. Again, engage in the conversation in the comments section, and I will see you on the other side of the mushroom. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Psilocybin Says. I am Eric Osborne. I'm here with Alexander the Great. He'd prefer to remain mostly anonymous. Those of you here in Louisville that know Alex know what an incredible person this is, and probably can intimate just from your experience with him why he is here on the show. But for those of you who don't know Alex, let me just say that Alex, through the conversations that we've had in some of our circles through Sanctuary, I have seen what an incredibly insightful, thoughtful, piercing mind this individual has, and I have encountered very few people in my life who can really dive into the depths of a subject like I've seen with Alex. And as I said in the introduction to this chapter, that I really want to help the audience understand why we're doing this the way we're doing it, what's happened, because I feel pretty strongly, and as hopefully will be revealed through this conversation, that this podcast, that Psilocybin Says, is much more than a podcast. And while it may seem like it's coming from me, I think that's one of the grand illusions that we're experiencing here. As all things, right? Like nothing's really coming from where you see it coming from. It starts somewhere else. So anyway, I think that's kind of all the intro I want to give, and just open up to Alex to start exploring what this is, why this is, where it come from, where is it going.
Cool.
Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Let's just dive right in. This podcast, Psilocybin Says, where did it start for your awareness? When was the first time it started to come up for you?
Yeah, I gave a little bit of a kind of a intimation into the intro, but I'd like to kind of go a little bit further, because one of the things that I've hoped to do with Psilocybin Says in particular is kind of traverse some of the landscape that is a little more potentially maybe taboo, uncomfortable, unfamiliar, not part of our daily discourse. I have really started to believe in the last few years that our awareness to kind of the other worlds that we are embedded in, or that are embedded into the interplay with ours, that there is more and more value in exploring that. You and I have talked quite a bit about some of the UFO phenomenon. We've read some of similar books there, and that's really, if I'm being honest with myself, that's part of it's. I don't want to say it's all of it, but it's a big part of the origin story of this show. So, September 9th, 2020, actually September 7th, 2020, my birthday, September 9th, I walked out of this house that I was staying at in Jamaica. And when I walked out at night, the moon was up, it was almost full, and Mars, the planet Mars, was like right to the left of the moon, behind it. And I had never seen that. I've kept pretty good track of the sky over the years. I'm not an astronomer or astrologist by any means, but I'm observant, and living in the country as I have, and in Jamaica, had great opportunity to kind of watch the heavenly bodies. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's interesting, and just kind of put a pin in it. Didn't really think too much about it. And then the next day, on the 8th, just my entire world began to shift drastically in what seemed like a pretty challenging, negative way. September 9th, 2020 was the most challenging birthday that I've ever experienced.
I'm going to cut in here really quick.
Yeah.
For your birthdays. Are those typically challenging days for you, or are they usually good days for you?
They've typically been nothing's days. I grew up in a place home where we didn't really celebrate birthdays. We weren't like religiously trained that way. It was just another day. And so we never paid much attention to it.
Gotcha.
It is interesting that birthday was the first one that I was intending on, like really kind of like putting some celebratory energy behind. Courtney and I were going to go to the Blue Mountains and get a chalet up there and whatnot. Didn't end up happening. And what ended up happening is having to manage some very challenging situations. And by the 13th, we were going to be leaving Jamaica and coming up here, and kind of managing things from up here. And so on the night of the 12th, I've been in like all this stuff's going on. I kind of like left Mars behind because it didn't really, again, I'm not into astrology. That didn't really matter to me. It was just something that I took note of on the 7th. Well, on the night of the 12th, I was laying in bed and I could not sleep. And there was this like familiar pull that just kept saying, like, it wasn't really saying anything, but there was kind of, the sense was a star wants to talk to you.
And so right there, you use the word say, but I mean, like, really, what was that experience like?
Yeah, it's more like a felt sense, right? It's just like this felt, I feel it like up in here. And it was very similar in retrospect, and even I think maybe even in the moment, I could recognize that pull, that call, was the very similar anyway to the call that I experienced the first time I had a very real shared encounter with a UFO. Like, it hit me in the head, pulled me to look. I see it, smack dude. He looks up, it shoots out his whole thing, and it was the same kind of like pulling. And so I actually had I had a huge bag of cannabis that I grew down there. I'd never grown weed, and I had never smoked any of the weed that I grew. I just made a bunch of butter out of it. I'd given up smoking at that point. I was like, well, let's go smoke a joint and sit with the stars then. I kept feeling that pull, so I did. So I rolled me a nice spliff, and I went on the beach and took a few hits as I'm walking the beach, and just kind of looking at the sky, not really feeling much of anything, just for the first few minutes. And then within maybe like 10 minutes at the most, I felt that same kind of like pull to look to the sky. And when I did, like, Mars, glowing red, was directly above me, right? And I mean, it was just like, I just felt like it was just pounding me, just radiating onto me, calling to me. And so I just kind of went into a trance state, and began, the beach is probably about 1,000 foot, with rocks on both ends, and I was just pacing this beach back and forth, feeling this whole thing. At a certain point, I like stopped and was compelled to start digging in the sand. And so I'm just digging right between my legs. I'm digging right between my legs, just ferociously digging. And then, like, without even thinking about it, I found myself, like, after I dug this hole between my legs, like, reaching out and digging like a rainbow. And I came to and kind of stood back, and it was this giant mushroom, right? Which, whatever. I was like, okay, that's cool. And it's really hard. I couldn't ever try to communicate everything that I was experiencing in that trance state, but what I can recall the most, and there's some stuff that I can recall that I don't want to share, but what I can recall and want to share was this voice, and it very much was a voice at this time that just kept saying, say psilocybin, say psilocybin, say psilocybin. And then I started saying it out loud, say psilocybin, say psilocybin. And it went on for about 2 hours, not just saying that, but like this whole kind of trance state with what felt like massive downloading. I had come to understand at that point by then that Mars was in retrograde, and that's why it was behind the moon. And on the beach at that point, I also heard, by the next time Mars is in retrograde, your life will be going in the other direction. All right, so it was a very tumultuous time, and it was indicating to me that by the next time this celestial cycle occurred, that things would be moving in a more positive, beneficial direction. And so I didn't know what to make of it. I knew there was a big part of me that was knowing that I had to have my own kind of sovereign space. And that was because of kind of what was going on around me, not from any kind of download in particular. And then the next day when I got up, I was just kind of feeling with it. It kind of, I guess, the after effect, or as I integrated that experience, it became Psilocybin says, say psilocybin. right? Because it's like, and I don't even know how to really like put that into, there's no kind of like direct line of thought, or it's just, that's kind of the intuitive sense that I came to. Psilocybin says, say psilocybin.
And you woke up into that?
And I woke up into that. Yeah. So, you know, the kind of concrete idea or interpretation that came out of that was that Eric needed to create his own playground where he could play by his own rules, and where nobody would have say over it or be able to use it against him, and that it was really important to put that word front and center, which has been, it's interesting because that's been a problem in terms of like algorithms and shadow banning and all that. Like the YouTube channel got very slow growth, and we think that it's because it's Psilocybin Says was the name of the YouTube channel, and we've gotten, you know, other social media kind of blackballing.
I know that I had searched for it before on YouTube, and it wouldn't auto-populate with
Really?
that. Yeah, like back in, at least in the beginning.
Yeah.
It was something that, for whatever reason, it wouldn't show up in my recent searches, but other things would. I thought that was a peculiar
if
occurrence.
you Google or if you search it on Facebook, sometimes, I don't know if it's always, but at least I've seen this a handful of times, it will give you a prompt for, do you have a drug problem?
Man.
Have a drug partner.
So with this, you know, you started with bringing up how you have kind of identified this need or this want to start to use language, or, you know, evolve our use of language and how we talk about psilocybin and our experience around this. Like there is some kind of hang up we have maybe in communicating about it. That's kind of what this podcast is about, and communicating around psilocybin and what it says to us, and you know, I guess the bigger picture there. So at what point did these experiences, did you start to gain meaning or gain the discernment that it needed to head like in a podcast direction?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, my original kind of interpretation of it was as a general lifestyle kind of brand, right?
Can you just drill into that for me? So why?
Yeah, I don't know that I know exactly, like from that night, or, you know, it's been such an enormous part of my life, 25 years this year, and it has informed, I want to say, every decision. I can't say every single decision, but every major decision or every major aspect of my lifestyle, psilocybin has been either an advisor or it has been considered in how it intersects, right? And so, like, even like my dogs, right? Like psilocybin drastically changed how I related with my animals or my snakes. Psilocybin has drastically altered the way that I look at food, the way that I look at sexuality, the way, across the board. And so, as an educator, that's always been my goal, is to help connect dots for people, or help people, give people the opportunity to connect the dots themselves, right? And psilocybin seems to be like one of the greatest dot connectors, for, in my world anyway, you know? And so that was just kind of the again, not like that was what was told to me by aliens or anything like that. It's just that was the felt sense that this was to be a lifestyle brand, kind of like that Life is Good brand.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
The podcast kind of naturally evolved. I mean, you know, I enjoy podcasting, for one. You know, been doing it for quite a while. And Sanctuary, when we started Sanctuary, there needed to be some way to help people know that it was there. I know that there were people, after I left Myco and the Psilocybin Chronicles podcast, people were like, where's it at? I kept seeing like reviews on iTunes and stuff saying, where'd this podcast go? I was like, oh man, I gotta get back out there. People actually, surprisingly to me,
People were listening.
And so, yeah, that was the impetus for the podcast, and then also really wanting to give Courtney a front-facing platform to share herself, you know, and to get her experience in media. And so it served that purpose well, and seems like it's time for it to evolve on beyond that now.
You talked about, you know, getting kind of the feeling or the intuition to create like a sovereign, you know, case for you to operate within. Up until that point, you know, even with psilocybin having, you know, a lot to say and do in your life, do you think that there was commonly like external influence that was impacting your behavior and lifestyle with psilocybin?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I have spoken pretty openly on this podcast with Courtney about, you know, our polyamorous lifestyle. And that has, in business context in particular, has been thrown in my face, you know, kind of threatened against me. Oh, people are going to think that, you know, if you're openly poly, then people are going to think that you're trying to be some kind of a sex guru or, you know, whatever. And like that was a conscious decision that I wanted to put something out there. That was part of the podcast as well, is that I wanted to put media out there that where I was able to just be full on Eric. So everybody knew what the fuck they were getting, because like as it was, feeling like I had to kind of suppress, at least publicly suppress, that aspect of my lifestyle. Not talking about on a podcast, not talking about with, you know, retreat guests or whatever, even though a lot of people were having challenges with monogamous life, and I felt like I had some valuable perspective to share, keeping that undercover because it made people uncomfortable, particularly like, you know, business folks. I felt like, yeah, really determined to have a space where I could present the world. And that way, if you don't like me, then just go on. You
Right.
you see who I am, you can keep on moving. But as long as we live these kind of, not double lives, but, you know, where if we're not like really being truly authentic, then it presents, I think it presents an opportunity for, you know, lifestyle choices that maybe aren't mainstream to be potentially leveraged against us, you know, and it just creates an air of hiding. And that is, like psilocybin has said to me so many times, nothing is hidden, even when you think it is, right? And so like, I don't ever like, especially as a facilitator of psychedelic ceremonies, I don't want to have anything that I feel like I'm hiding in any way, because that will come out in the space.
Do you feel like you're navigating less identity now with this?
Oh my God, yes.
And has that changed your relationship with psilocybin at all?
That's a really good question. See why I brought him in? Yeah, for sure. Because, you know, I can think of times with, and this like sexuality topic was, and maybe still is, one of the most challenging for kind of mainstream folks to wrap their heads around. And so it's understandable that, you know, talking about ethical non-monogamy makes people uncomfortable. But there were numerous times where I'd be working with somebody and they would be having, some kind of an issue around monogamy. And I felt like I couldn't directly relate that to them. And it was depriving them of growth, depriving me of growth. Anytime, I believe anyway, anytime that we're hiding anything, and there's a difference between privacy and hiding, but anytime we're suppressing something, let's put it that way, it's going to come out sideways, right? And so just the sheer fact that I felt like I had to suppress this part of myself, it created an internal conflict that caused significant discomfort at best, you know, within the psychedelic space. So, and it's not like I wasn't lying to myself, but I didn't feel like I was really being true to myself. And then that is going to come out in a mushroom experience.
Yeah, I find that, at least in my experiences, anything that that suppression's a great word for it. That it seems like there's intentional suppression around it, or something I'm not really wanting to look at and investigate. Psilocybin has a knack for saying it real loud and clear when you're hanging out with it.
Yeah.
I mean, have you seen that as a common theme for folks, across experience in terms of the people you've seen in ceremony?
Suppression coming out sideways? Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, what is your, back to kind of what psilocybin says, like, what are your thoughts around the consistency of that?
I think it's just saying that nothing is hidden even when you think it is, and like we can see you. And like that attempt to hide, right? It's just like you just end up backing yourself up into a corner, so I don't know, that has been, I think if there's been like the biggest thing that psilocybin has influenced in my life is to live my truth, to be as true, because I know when I eat mushrooms, if I'm not living true, it's gonna punch me right in the nose.
Do you think the communication ever evolves? Like, let's say, you get to a point where you're living as true as possible. As far as you're aware, your awareness is concerned, you're being as true as possible. Does the lesson change?
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the evolution of my experiences over 25 years has been pretty dramatic. And it's interesting, like when I was in Jamaica, there towards the end, I did a half a gram or something within the ceremony, and it just rocked me like it was a 6 gram trip. And I remember at the end of it, which I facilitated for people with me on 15 grams, right? So like having like a 6 gram experience wasn't like I couldn't take care of people. It was just that at a certain point, when everything was calm, I went and sat by myself for a little bit.
Right.
And so when I did that, when I went and sat under this coconut tree, my very first trip, I can't really say how it happened, like how it played out, but underneath that tree, my very first mushroom trip at age 19, like came back, taught me a really valuable lesson that I'm not able to articulate, and said to me, on your next solo experience, you will level up. And so like I can look back and see the progression of my experiences, how you get to a certain point, and like I had like, the first year, 2, 3, 4 years I'm doing mushrooms, it was mainly just like having fun, laughing, exploring different ideas, unique ideas. And then I had my first ego death experience that changed the landscape. Then I had this like whole year of just like, really like forcing me to look at every inconsistency in my life.
Yeah, so with the ego death experience, what did that enable for you? Or what did that, what other dominoes started to fall for you once that happened?
Well, it's easy to say that it opened up the perspective of, eternity, of being eternal, right? Of the idea, the experience of kind of, dissolution and resurrection. That it opened up the perspective that of this oneness.
Was it like what you had imagined up until that point?
Oh, I didn't know what to think at that point. I mean, this is like, 2008 or 2009 probably. I just kind of been listening to Terrence McKenna and talking about 5 grams in Silent Darkness, and but I think like I think what it opened up for me more than anything was the awareness that the psilocybin experience was far more expansive than I could ever have imagined. You know, I kind of thought it was like alcohol, you know, like you drink alcohol, you kind of have this linear trajectory. You know what happens when you drink this much beer or whatever,
Right.
you know. And I saw that this was actually a doorway into an entirely different world. Because my first kind of ego death experience was also my first encounter with any kind of an entity, you know, and it scared the shit out of me. And then I had many death experiences after that. And each one, that's one of the main things that they opened up to me was, at first it was like, this is like a space in your head. This is a psychic space, right? And then it began to open up to, oh no, this is a real place. And then it began there are so many places. And that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. And it's like multiverse, you know. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers.
No, yeah. And, you know, when these insights started to roll in, do you think that there was anything specific that pointed your mind in that direction? Or was it just kind of all of a sudden?
I think McKenna had a big role to play in that, you know.
So outside of what psilocybin says, where does commentary from people in the psychedelic environment, where does that fit into all of this? Like if you have a model, or you've got insights that you gain from psilocybin, but then potentially insights from not psilocybin beings, how does that all fit together for you? Like, how do you implement that or think about those things?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on who the being is, right? Like Terence McKenna, in a lot of ways, I feel like he, charted a lot of that landscape. And so what he communicated out, I think, was a lot of useful information that kind of helped me and others be like, oh yeah, okay, this is the thing that others have recognized along the way. There's always been the, not concern, but the awareness that someone else can influence my subjective experience through their subjective experience. And like, what if this is objective? That has been a very important and challenging question for me along this journey, because I don't care for like bullshit. Like I care for objective reality. This brought so much of that into question, but there is, like, I think there's still a lot of value in really trying to parse out what is external influence that's floating around in my subconscious, what is like, if there is actually like another being that is communicating to me, are we actually having a psychic telepathic exchange, or are we just imagining it, right? Because, I mean, I've always felt, even as very young, that we're not aware of our full capabilities. I've only started to...
Well, where did that start? So, sorry to cut you off, but why, when you say, I've always been aware since I was young, where does your mind go there when you bring that up?
Because I had dreams that would come true. Like, I would have night dreams that would come true the day or 2 days after the dream. And I've honestly only just begun to, in the last week, have I only begun to recall some of those memories. Because it happens, it hasn't happened for a while, but it happens. And like, there was a period last year, I think it was, where for about 2 weeks, I would have a dream and it would happen the next day. And I started like on day 7, I was like, hey Courtney, I had this dream last night. And she'd be like, oh, that's cool. And then it would happen and she'd be like, no, I know, this has been happening. And so I think that it's interesting, because from a very young age, I recognize that we have far more capabilities than we're aware of, and I also shut it down. Like,
I was going to say, like, as a kid, how did you handle those experiences, or what did you even think about them? If you can
I remembered yesterday. I was really sitting with this yesterday. I remember telling my mom about a dream that, and I think that I told her, like, I can't remember how it went down, but I remember basically being dismissed and dismissing myself with that. It's so interesting to me that I am like such a, I think, like an independent thinker, but I haven't always been. I always wanted to please my parents, please the priest, make everybody happy. And so I think I shut a lot of stuff down. Like I recognize now, like, you know, just intuitiveness that yeah, I shut down as a kid. So.
And do you think that that's like in the big scheme of things intentional? I do feel like there's a just a recurring theme of folks having experiences or just having more open minds as children, and then we close that stuff out. We tune our filter, but some of it feels intentional. It doesn't feel not in a good or a bad way. Just that it's part of the design or part of the way that we're being spoken to.
Designed, yeah, it's like part of the design. Because I don't think. Maybe I did. Maybe I intentionally was like, I'm going to shut off these capabilities. But I feel like it was more like a result of the environment, which scaling back is like, that's the big design.
Yeah, right.
Everything's just flowing. And so as I've looked at it, I've actually, like, in the last couple of years, I've really started to think about this. Like, how is it that I have been, like, so deeply immersed in this psychedelic world for so long and not gone off the rails, not like completely fucking bonkers, because I've seen a number of people who have had, psychotic breaks and stuff.
So what do you think the difference is? So where have you gotten?
Because I shut it down. I put up such a wall to my whatever spiritual self, psychic self, whatever we want to call that. And so, like, that's the people who I've tended to see have more psychotic break episodes, is people who were didn't have quite the psychic energetic boundaries. And then, we're being told, and psilocybin is being promoted as this kind of psychiatric tool, right? It's just another medicine. It's not being treated like an access point to other worlds. When that's how it's been treated historically, that's what the early research suggested. There was a lot of research around, or a fair amount of research around psychedelics' ability to open up ESP and other stuff, clairvoyancy and whatnot. I've seen it so many times in the mushroom space. People become these vehicles of clairvoyancy. And so I think if I hadn't put up that barrier, that I would have been subject to madness, let's say.
And so you feel okay, like you feel okay with how it's all shook out, or how this is.
Oh yeah, I mean, it is all doing what it's supposed to do,
Yeah.
There's, not to say it, obviously there's like challenge and struggle along the way.
Right. Yeah. And kind of just back to McKenna for a minute, and to your point that a lot of the conversation is around a therapeutical state or situation, and coming up more in like healthcare and mental health care seems to be the focus of how to implement psilocybin and how we should exist relationally to it. What are your thoughts on folks that are just getting into the space now, and instead of having just McKenna, they've got all these other voices that are boxing it in to just be a medical implement. Do you feel one way or the other about how it's being framed?
Yeah, I do. I feel that is a valid use and perspective, but that it is like the lowest hanging fruit. Like, I remember this guy, I want to say he was like a medical doctor or something. I remember I worked with him. He came out of his trip once and he sat up and he goes, "Of course this shit cures depression. I just talked to God for 4 yours. It's like, yeah, like that's why your depression is better, because you're seeing that there's so much more beyond this mundane world. I feel like that's, anyway, I mean, and we know through the research, again, that the mystical experience and the power of the mystical experience is directly correlated to the length of relief people get from depression and anxiety, right? And so it's interesting, like, we are doing a great service to humanity by reintroducing psilocybin, but perhaps to an extent we're doing a disservice in ways because we're still, like, limiting that to a very Western framework. I've heard just up to a couple days ago that some of the facilities in Oregon that are doing some really high dose work are starting to see some kind of weird phenomenon that's causing people to think differently, which is good. I think that's going to be a natural outcome.
Yeah.
How long until we're ready to talk about that in kind of the mainstream, if we ever are, I don't know.
So, I mean, are you of the mindset that we should be talking about these things, regardless of where the current, where pop culture is at in terms of talking about psilocybin? Do you think it's always worth just going straight to it sometimes?
Well, no, I mean, not all the time, no. I mean, there's definitely, kind of a graduating in, and for some, this might be really deep water right here that we're wading in right now and potentially going to get deeper. And that's okay. I mean, I do feel like sometimes you have to start before you're ready, and I guess what really comes to my mind when you ask that question is my experience is that everything, my experience is maturing to understand that everything in the physical world is being influenced by the non-physical world. Many years ago, probably 15 years ago, it would have been 11 years ago, I had an experience where I saw some people in my life and my relationship with them, and these were individuals that, like, there wasn't a good fit. Anyway, the outcome of that experience was the question, who do you work for? And my understanding was that we could tell who we were working for by the just like the fruits of your labor, right? If and it's easy, like, look it up. If I'm working for a mob boss, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna fucking kill people and steal shit and do, like, bad things. If I'm working for Mother Teresa, I'm delivering food to the hungry or whatever. But if whether I'm working for the mob, or whether I think I'm working for the mob boss, or I think I'm working for Mother Teresa, who I know there's some controversy about Mother Teresa. Nobody's any one thing. Just saying, easy example. Whether I think I'm working for the mob boss or Mother Teresa, the reality is that they're working for somebody else. And that somebody else might not be visible to the human eye. And so I think if we understood that better, we would reconsider some of our behavior. Pornography is a great example. I've been really trying to bring this conversation to the into my work anyway, because it's something that I have I don't want to ever say I've overcome anything, but I feel like I have kind of moved beyond that at this point in my life. Again, always things can happen. But who do we think the porn industry is working for? Right? And we can go look and see who like owns the porn companies, and that's a very interesting rabbit hole to go down, because there are some folks that you might not suspect who own almost all of the tubes. Yeah, but
not shocked that it goes to a small number of people that are actually running the show, but.
Right. But where is that coming from? And that's the as I have continued to experience like intuitive sense, being told something was happening before it happened. Like my question is, where's that coming from? And so if there are principalities that are communicating with me in regards to like a course of action, and as you and I have talked about this, like, NASA is founded in the occult. It is historically documented that these folks were like communicating supposedly with disembodied entities, right? And I think that's a really important question. I think it's a really important conversation that ironically seems to have been snuffed out by the church. Why is that? Well, when you see that the Catholic Church in particular was raping children and sweeping that under the rug, I think you have to ask, who's the Pope working for?
It does seem like there is a, just, kind of just back to the design of things, my mind has, come to similar places just in thinking about an organized religion and the, some of the power structures that are out there, but then also that coming into conflict with the idea of like things being designed intentionally to allow for, spiritual growth. So where does, at least in my awareness and in your awareness, we have these, these structures that seemingly are just propagating evil and suffering into the world. And so, why is that? Like, how does that relate to spiritual growth? And how does that relate to what psilocybin says to us and, what we can glean from it, right? Like there's, it's just a place my mind goes where it's, I don't have any answers, but if I'm going to make the claim that there's a beautiful design here, why is that included in this beautiful design?
Oh, I think it's essential, right? We have to have contrast. We live in a duality, like the unity is made up of duality. The yin yang's all over the place, and so we understand that. But just because the Tao is in the turd, as Chuang-Tzu, the great Taoist teacher, stated, doesn't mean that we have to eat it, right? It doesn't mean that like we live with it in our house. That's really was my original love for mushrooms and snakes, is that with the wisdom of discernment, you can decide which one will kill you and which one will heal you, right? And so like that, the mushroom kind of phenomenologically embodies those two poles.
Yeah, right. That's cool.
Right? And like if you look at like how the Amanita, not Phalloides, whatever the destroying angel, I think is, like this is a mushroom that is delicious. It's beautiful. If you eat it, tastes great. 12 hours later, you get some diarrhea and vomiting maybe. Up to 2 weeks later, your liver shuts down and you die. Now, if you look at the defense mechanism of any other organism on the planet, it's a direct 1-to-1. You get bit by the rattlesnake, your fucking leg swells up. You get stung by the bee. You eat the poison berry. There's nothing else that I know of that has a similar trajectory towards fatality. And as I've thought about that over the years, like to me, it feels like an intelligent design that forces us to really deeply know our environment. So like there's a polarity even in that. Like there is an enormous benefit that can come from studying something that's so deadly, right? So anyway, it's just kind of like I think that good and evil, light and dark, they have to always be present, but we get to choose which side we're on, maybe.
And this coming to know our world, like physically at least, coming to know our world, for you, where does that connect to this this idea that things precede physical form, that they're just a result here, so if we study and learn the mushroom, right? How does that connect us, or where can we bridge the gap or start to think about the use of studying physical form to understand non-physical form, if that question makes sense?
The use of physical form to study non-physical form. Wow. The first thing that comes to my mind is like sacred geometry and how we see like resonant frequencies create visible patterns, right? And so maybe it's similar. Like, if you who do you work for? What's behind this whole thing? So, it's like the notion of coherence, right? If there is coherence that comes out of whatever that invisible is, then that feels like healthier, right? Whereas if there is discord and right, then that feels like an unhealthy kind of thing. It's like it's so easy to get into like like the contrast or the challenge of like reconciling the non-dual with the dual.
Yeah.
Because I'm not, even though I'm talking about light and dark and good and bad, it's all one thing, right? And at the same time, it provides us an opportunity to, like, God, it's such an interesting, there's like, it feels like there's a place where like ideas don't work, where the words just stop working. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, given the choice, we have a friend that does MMA, right? And we went to a fight of his. I've never been to a fight. I was like 30 minutes in, I was like, I'm the fuck out of here. I didn't like, I see somebody hit somebody in the face 3 times and nobody's stopping anything. I'm like, what the fuck? Stop. And I'm not saying there's necessarily anything right or wrong with the thing, but we're drawn to what we're in alignment with, what we match with. And there are objectively things that cause harm. Now, like, because we, at least in my worldview, we live forever, like, there's also no such thing as harm, right? Because it's just forever. But there also is very much harm that can come from action. I mean, we're like, seems like we're approaching World War III or whatever.
Right.
And that sucks, and it's all good at the same time.
Does that make you uncomfortable at all? Like, having that realization that it sucks and it's all good? Like, if you ever, just sit with that?
I think it gives me more comfort when I sit with it. It's when I think that it's not all good, when I think that we shouldn't have war, which is my, general state, and I see it seeming to be on the horizon, then that's when I don't feel comfortable. But
what shows you that it's all good? So, like, just in your experience, Eric's experience, how are you discerning that it's all good?
That has been through watching mushroom experiences. I mean, I have, honestly, I feel like in this regard, I'm one of the most fortunate people on the planet, that I have watched, hundreds of group experiences play out. And when to see what looks like an ailment or a weakness or a flaw or a fault, to see how that is what allows for the greatness that comes from it, then like I have to accept that whatever's happening is ultimately leading to something. And I've just seen that so many times. And I've also seen it outside the mushroom space. So like in my relationships in life, you think, like things are going one way, this is all bad, or something bad happens, you think it's bad, and all of a sudden it opens up to something bigger and more beautiful. Also, there is just the mechanism of evolution where life is always working for life. Like show me anywhere that evolution is working against itself. And since like all of this is a product of that, at least in my perspective, it has to be moving towards good.
Do you think human thought is a product of evolution? Like, do you think the more that we're able to think about things differently, is that a result of evolution, you think?
I don't know. But and that's where this whole like world behind our world, and I feel like I have a pretty different perspective on evolution as well. I'm not like Darwinian by any means. I mean, evolution is a mechanism that is operating, but I'm not convinced that like Darwinian evolution, natural selection is how like primates became humans, because there's a big fucking gap in there, a major gap. And when I seem to have ideas and others have ideas that they intentionally seek out from the ether, or like the American Cosmic book, the guy reading about in there, when they're performing rituals so that they can receive new technology from intelligence beyond themselves. Do you consider that, is that evolutionary? If the pressure exerted is from an intentional force.
It's tough. I guess for me, I guess I don't want to make an assumption as to what evolution is trying to get at. I think for me, I can use the word evolution to say that there is some mechanism at play, or there is some type of iteration that's happening that seems of some type of progression. And I think that we make the assumption initially, at least, or just what we say is that the purpose is to preserve life here on the physical plane. But I don't know if that's the case.
But you use the word progression. So even in using that word, it indicates like forward movement.
Yeah, I think that there's a cyclical movement maybe, but progression, at least from our perspective.
Yeah. I'm much more of the cyclical perspective. Like I don't think not to say we won't, and I hope we do. But like this kind of idea that we're just going to endlessly create technology until we like move to Mars or whatever. It's taking out the consideration that we have very obviously multiple times had massive cataclysmic disasters on this earth that wiped out all technology. And so I tend to think more in cycles than this like endless evolutionary growth.
Do you see us as technology, human beings as technology in any way, or awareness maybe?
Again, that comes back to like how we interpret our creation stories. I mean, like the oldest creation story is that we were genetically engineered from beings from beyond this planet. Like that's the Sumerian tale. That's the oldest creation story. And so if you believe that, then we are technology, or we're the product of technology, or we're amalgamation,
There was an external influence.
There was an external influence, yeah.
On our coming up. For you, do you have any interest in these things in terms of actually trying to suss them out, or do you, like for you and just your personal practice, these ideas and these, just these topics, are they more just fun to think about, or do you feel like there's any kind of importance in arriving to any kind of conclusion?
I'm not in favor of conclusions. I used to be just this is just something to ponder. And then as it began to, as I perceived and still do perceive, it began to engage with me, then I felt that meant that there was not only the ability but the impetus for me to reciprocate.
Your ability to reciprocate. So some of my mind has kind of been lately is if psilocybin says to me, can I say back anything, right? Mm-hmm. And so have you noticed your practice develop in any kind of ways, or your relationship with psilocybin evolve in any way where you feel like you are an active respondent to what comes back or what comes up from it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At times. And sometimes I'm talking to myself. Sometimes I'm talking to the trees. Sometimes the trees are talking to me. And I mean, I really, like, I guess that's something that is worth kind of digging into a little bit here, is that I don't know that I ever believe, it's not true. There are definitely times when growing mushrooms, and when harvesting wild mushrooms, I picked a bunch of wild psilocybin yesterday, and it very much feels like those mushrooms, just like the trees, are communicating with me. And so I do feel like, even lion's mane. There was a time where I was walking through the woods once looking for maitake, and I kept coming across a bunch of this old maitake that's too mature to harvest, and was about to give up. It was raining, and I was like, all right, well, I'm going home. And as I'm standing there, I hear behind me, turn and look. And I turned, and right behind, like 10 feet behind me on this tree, was a lion's mane, this huge lion's mane mushroom. And I was like, that mushroom just told me to turn and look. Or something did. It seemed like the mushroom, and I've had enough experience with plants that I do feel like they're communicating with me. So I do feel like psilocybin, the mushrooms themselves, like the living organism itself, can talk to us. We can have communication with our plants, with our animals, with our mushrooms. The communication that I get in the psilocybin experience, I don't know that I would say that's psilocybin talking to me.
Okay.
It's potentially a number of things. It's my own subconscious. It is maybe the animals around me, or the elements, or whatever it is that I may be engaging with. I certainly have felt like fire is communicating information to me. The stars communicating information to me. And then there is the kind of whole like conversation around entities or beings communicating with us, so it's kind of like the conclusions. I don't think it's not any one thing necessarily.
What's it look like for you to try to work through that? And for me, at least, when I get into the space, it can get kind of loud, or there can just be a lot of signals, right, to tune into. What does it look like for you to browse those channels and I guess intuit, where to place your intention?
Yeah, it gets really confusing at times. Well, I don't know that I listen to the loudest voice. I think I might listen to, like, there is, God. So I've had this experience where on my left shoulder there is like information coming in, and this, like, I guess I'm okay to say this out loud. It'd be challenging to try to encapsulate all the evidence that I collected over the years that brought me to the point where I'm at now with it. It's not a conclusion, but it's like my current understanding is that I have had some deceased relatives and friends that have been like active participants with me in that space. And so like there is a kind of a physical location that is associated with that form of communication. And then there are other kind of fields, it seems like, perhaps. There have been a number of times where an individual that is there present at a ceremony becomes a voice for something larger than themselves, and that can be like a clairvoyancy or like any number of things. So I don't know that I really can tell other than just like intuition or what feels to be the most like relevant in this moment, because there is always noise coming in and you can like, I'm not tuning into that right now. I'm going to stay here, or, you know. So I don't know that I have a good answer other than just kind of a intuitive sense of what is the most useful information at this moment.
Would you say that you tie like your experience of emotion to intuition at all?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, emotion and physical. Excuse me. You know, started to experience nausea as an intuitive sense, like telling me like if I would find myself feeling nauseous around certain people. I started, or have been times where I have felt physical pain, and then very soon after like feeling that pain, the person next to me would say, "Oh, my whatever hurts," and it'd be the same thing that was hurting with me, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." I feel like emotion, for me anyway, as it connects to intuition, is maybe a little more about what other people are experiencing. When it comes to kind of the external communications, that's not really connected with emotion as much as it feels like it's connected with it's not even like a physical sense. It's almost like I feel it out here.
And is that where you're using as your like metric to test if it's external? If it's out here to you, then are you like
Not
saying?
necessarily, no, because like I was saying, I'll feel other people's physical stuff within my body at times, right? And so that's an external thing that's influencing me internally. Now, the feeling that it's out here is maybe more connected with non-physical, right? It might still be connected with someone else's energy field. I've absolutely, and again, like this is one of the first times I've really like gotten real detailed on this stuff. I feel like, but like, you know, one of the practices that I've had over the years, as I've come to understand it, is like mushrooms are coming on. I go and get all by myself. I'm like at least 20 feet away from everybody. Let it move through me, get the chills, go through it, and then I can just kind of feel like this like tinglingness on my skin and kind of in the air around me. And then I would use that and walk up, particularly in the dark. Found it really helpful to kind of walk closer to people and start to feel kind of like, how does it feel different here than it felt over there? And so that kind of non-physical. Now, the thinking about things like, I don't know, energies or beings or whatever you want to call that, like even still like the star stuff has felt almost every time that I can recall has felt very much like crown of my head kind of feeling. Yeah.
What do you think is going on there? I know that's a broad question,
Yeah.
but you know, these entities or communications that we at least as far as experience is concerned are happening. Where have you gotten in pondering what it means and where that's coming from?
Well, I mean, I guess it until I want to say recently. It's not necessarily recently. I mean, the first opening that I had to this being outside of my own psyche, my own subconscious, was on several occasions over the course of several years. I would have people who did not know the history, had no relationship with me outside of that ceremony space, ask me who Amy was or tell me that they saw Amy, and Amy was my cousin who passed away when we were like 16. She was 16, I was probably 14. Total homie, very good friends, loved her so deeply. And on about 3 different occasions at this point, I've had people say after the fact, so who is Amy? And I'll be like, why do you ask? And they would tell me things that they heard or experienced that were connected to me or connected to somebody who'd see me doing something. And so that was my first, like, okay, maybe this is not just my own subconscious projection. I mean, for years I've experienced alien operations and mantids and all the stuff that people talk about. I'm like, this is just in the zeitgeist. This is just like me pulling in what is kind of pop culture. And then those experiences shifted things for sure. And then within the last year, I've had some kind of, this is where you ask the question of like the material world and how it alludes to what's in the non-material world, where like I've hesitated whether or not to share this with anybody, and it's not something that I like want to get on a bandwagon about, but it became, to me at this point, I have just accepted that there are entities that are like not just communicating with me. It's the weirdest thing. Like it's really shaken my world up, and I believe it relates to that communication that I got saying like my next solo trip I would level up,
So what's weird for you, right? So you talk about all these weird things that have come up for you, and I believe it. Like I just, the psilocybin space, just I think weird goes with it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess I'll share this because it's it probably will give others some solace. I have heard one mathematician anyway talking about the same thing, Richard Grant or Robert Grant, I can't remember. He's a mathematician, incredible human being. So this to date is the weirdest that has ever happened. And again, I'm not, I don't just believe something because I think it, right? I have to really like observe and study over long periods of time. I'm not a woo-woo kind of person. Well, so let's see. When did it start? Started with Bashar. So I was listening to Bashar, who, those of you who don't know, like Bashar is supposedly this guy that Daryl Anka channels this supposedly alien. The first time I heard this 10 years ago, Courtney introduced me to Bashar. I was like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever heard of, and I really don't ever want to hear about it again. Like, this is fuck this. Well, when we came back from Jamaica, I started getting into some personal growth stuff and different things, and somehow Bashar popped up on one of my playlists on YouTube, and it's like, well, we'll give Bashar another go. I've kind of pushed my boundaries a little bit. I started listening to it, and I was like, damn, this is some of the best information I've ever heard. And so I kept listening to him, and about a year and a half after listening to Bashar pretty regularly, I was listening to him talk about the crystal skulls. And as I'm listening, I hear, and I'm just like cleaning or cooking dinner or something, and as I'm listening to it, I get this same kind of communication that I did with Mars that says, you're going to be gifted a crystal skull. And I was just like, whatever. That's just me hearing this. I'm just like imagining shit. Just like don't believe it because you think it.
But just
right?
to be clear, this hearing here, it was actually, like language.
No, it was like this internal like heart hearing almost.
Okay.
But that was like that. You are going to be gifted a crystal skull. Like that was it. And I was just like, whatever. I'm just like fucking hearing Bashar. I'm just imagining shit. So didn't really think anything of it. Go on about my business. And maybe like 3 or 6 months later, would have been spring last year. There's a big windstorm that came through, and power went out. Courtney took the kids to go stay with her parents, and I stayed here because it was still chilly to keep my snakes warm, right? So I knew her parents weren't going to be down with me bringing 5-foot boa constrictors in their house. And so I kept a fireplace going, kept them in pillowcases right next to the fireplace with a thermometer, and I was monitoring them the whole time. And so I decided, all right, here's my chance to eat mushrooms solo. I mean, at that point, we'd been back from Jamaica for over 2 years. I hadn't done a solo trip in probably 3 years. And I was like, okay, now's your chance. And so my oldest son was living here at the time in this room, as a matter of fact, and he was gone to work, so I was going to eat mushrooms by myself. So measure out 5 grams of ovoids, and I ain't never seen nothing like this, dude. The mushrooms like damn near jumped in my mouth. Usually it's like, oh God, here we go. I took one mushroom, it's like, and I was like, whoa. I seriously was in the kitchen like, what the fuck just happened? That ain't never happened before. And so they start coming on, and I'm like, all right, here we go. And there was just this compelling pressure to get on my knees. And it was just like, get on your knees now. And so I just like, it was like there was a hand on the back of my head just pushing me down. I go down by the fire, and I'm just like on all fours down, like, what the fuck is okay. And then there was this just towering felt presence. I couldn't see anything. I'm not a very visual tripper. I couldn't see, but I could just feel what felt like this, unlike anything that I've ever felt. And I've dealt with some pretty powerful stuff in the trip space. And so I'm down in this position, and whenever I have had an experience that felt intimidating like that, it didn't feel malevolent, but it just felt more powerful than anything I've ever been. And anytime I have anything like that, I don't consider myself a Christian. But I do have a sense that the Spirit of Christ, as it were, is a very powerful protector, and that is, again, like I've never really said this publicly. I've very, very seldom even said it out loud, but whenever I've found myself having to manage something that somebody might call an exorcism or something like that, and I've had some weird stuff. That light, as I perceive it, is what I have always kind of called on and used to dispel darkness. And in this situation, that's what I did. And immediately, this is one of the things for me, how I kind of have grown to discern my own voice, my own internal voice from something maybe coming in, is that my voice, it takes time. It's like I think about it and then I say it. These other experiences, it's like, boom, there's the answer, right? And so like in this instance, I did this whole, like, went into my place in this consciousness and Christ and Haile Selassie and the great beings that have walked this earth. And immediately this thing was like, they work for me. And it wasn't like in my perspective up to that point was always like, Christ works for God, right? But this was not like God, the all that is. This was a bad motherfucker. This was a being, right? And so like when that happened, I was like, whoa. So I don't even know. Like I'm subject to whatever happens now because all my tools, like this thing made my tools, right? And it freaked me out. It really freaked me out because I've never ever felt like I didn't have some leverage. And the next kind of thing that came in was, I'm going to show you why the snakes have been with you your whole life. And since I was a kid, like, I was very, very young, 3 years old, I had like instead of teddy bears, I had like snakes.
Nice.
And then it was like I was taken back into ancient Egypt and shown these like sacred cobras and the high priests, and taken over to the Celtics and shown the serpent, and taken to the Mayan and shown like all these cultures and shown all these like the priest class with their sacred serpents. And it didn't say this is who you are. It just was like, this is why, because this is why. And then it became like overtly Egyptian, which I have had zero interest in Egyptology whatsoever. Don't like even like all the pyramid stuff. I'm just like, I don't really care. Whatever it is. Whatever. And so I just never put any time there. But this was so Egyptian that I was just like, what? How? Why am I here? It was very confusing for a long time. Lots of sweating, lots of snotting. Just there, snakes, Egypt. Not a lot of like memorable content other than what I just shared. I came out of it and was just like, who was that? Who the fuck? I've never. And so my son comes home. It's like 10 p.m. He comes home from work, and we just have a conversation. I just like, well, it was a big trip because I was taking mushrooms. Like, it was a big trip. Didn't really tell me anything about it. And so I didn't realize at that time, and I do now, he had just started living with me again after several years of not, that he is schizophrenic, right? This is the third time that I've experienced someone have a schizophrenic episode triggered just by being around people who are in mushroom space. There's an incredible story that I could share that I won't go into right now, but the next morning, I woke up and still I was just like, what the fuck was that? Who was that being? I gotta understand. And so I get out my phone and start like looking up Egyptian serpent cults. That's the only thread I had, right? At some point in the reading that I was doing, I came across this character Thoth, right? And there was nothing about it that was really particularly compelling. It just, like, in my heart, there was like this, like, almost like you can stop looking now. But that still didn't make any sense to me. I was like, whatever. So maybe 30 minutes to an hour after this Google searching I'm doing, my son comes upstairs and he's starting to go into a schizophrenic break. And it's the first time I saw it in him, but I've seen several breaks, and I knew that's what was happening. So he goes outside, he's chain smoking cigarettes and weed, and I can see him out there just starting to go into this ranting kind of thing. And he comes back in and he just starts pointing at me and he's going, Thoth, Thoth, Thoth. And I was like, what the fuck? And I just like gave him space. I wasn't gonna try to intervene, just let it, didn't know what to make of any of it. I had to deal with that situation, and so I kind of put my trip and everything aside to deal with him and what he was going through, and really never made anything of it after that, right? The day after that trip, this friend of mine out in Colorado calls me up. He's like, man, you're not going to believe this. I'm like, what? He's like, dude, I was in a meditation last night, and Thoth told me I have to send you a crystal skull. I was like, what? It's like, yeah, I don't know, man. I was doing this like raw meditation, and Thoth came in And any other time I would have just kind of dismissed it. But because of this chain of events, I was like, what? And so from Bashar to there. And so he sends me this pretty significant, like I said, not a small crystal skull. And
Your awareness before all of this came up, what, if anything, did you know about crystal skulls?
not a thing.
Like, not,
Indiana Jones.
that was it.
I have not even been, I don't, like, I have that black mushroom rock that Kevin gave me. I have never been a crystal person. I've never been a, like, that was pure fucking woo to me, and I didn't want anything to do with it, right? And so he sends me this thing, and I'm like, what do I do with this? And so I got it, just kind of sat on the shelf, didn't know what to make of it. About 3 months later, I go and do a mushroom trip with a friend who is a bit of a channel now, starting to see. Didn't know that, but like we eat mushrooms together. We each did 7 grams of ovoids. We're sitting and this made a little fire there between us. And as the trip comes on, he's like making a bunch of noise and it's kind of distracting, and I'm like separating myself. I'm trying to stay in my experience and not get sucked into that. And so he's over 20, 30 feet away making all his noise, gibberish talk, and I'm over here just kind of looking a different way, trying to stay in my zone. And it's going on like that for a good 45 minutes or so, and it's really coming on hard. I'm kind of doing some purging and stuff, and at a certain point I hear him just like, it's not recording? Oh, it is, okay. At a certain point I hear him just, it sounds like he's screaming at me. And I was like, what the, so I was like, all right, what? And I turn around and he's sitting in this chair opposite of me in the fire, and his face is like going red and yellow, and he's going Thoth, Thoth, Thoth. And I was like, whoa, what? And it became like important that I paid attention. And so like I went over and like kind of like got down by the fire, was like, okay, what am I to make of this? And I don't think I want to go into what's transpired for the next 4 hours.
Are you cool to talk about, this character in, Egyptian history? What, what's the...
Yeah, it's not Egyptian history. It goes back further than Egyptian history. I mean, if you... And so I did start diving into this, and like the Egyptian story of Thoth is that he was the origin of language, the origin of magic, a moon god, which mushrooms in Egyptology were associated with moon and other cultures as well. But beyond that, if you go into, the Sumerian stories, which is where a lot of the Egyptian stuff came out of, Thoth was Enki. That's another important part of that mushroom trip that I had, is that at the outset of it, the one here in my house with the snakes, at the outset of it, right after the snake thing, I was told, or it felt like, whatever said, like, everything you've been told, the opposite is true. But it didn't say that, but what I understood, or how that, like, the packet that came in, was that everything you had been told about God, the opposite of is true. And as you start to read the biblical stories, and understanding that the biblical story is actually based out of the Sumerian tablets, right? And that in the Sumerian story, there were these two brothers, Enki and Enlil, and they were the sons of the Anu, these alien beings that came to the planet. And Enlil wanted to create a slave race, right? And so he convinced Enki and the others to genetically modify humans or primates into this slave species that would not be aware of their origin, but out of compassion, Enki, who was also the serpent gave the humans knowledge of their origin, and according to the Sumerian story, Enki is the one who informed Utnapishtim, or Noah, that there was a flood coming because these gods had decided to destroy the humans because they had become too aware of their own kind of divine origins, right? And so Enki has been understood through different cultures to be this kind of, whatever, savior of mankind, the purveyor of wisdom. But what is confused is that Enlil is associated with the Judeo-Christian God that wants to keep people enslaved, that wants to prevent people from understanding that they are the gods, right? And if you look at the story, the biblical story of Adam and Eve, it was actually the serpent that told the truth in that story, right? The God said that you will die, and the serpent said, no, you'll become like the gods. Your eyes will open like the gods. And that's what happened. And so, like, there is an interesting connection to the mushroom and its ability to open our eyes to the reality of our divinity and the apple of Adam and Eve, and even the Sumerian story.
For you, and I know this is like impossible to answer, but what does that feel like when we get opened up to our divinity, or to this experience of being more than what we are? What are some of the big signposts for you that you discern from that, or that you're able to pull back, if that makes sense?
I guess part of that is eternal, the eternal self. And like, if we have been kept in a fear-based state, particularly around the fear of death, by religion and hell and all that for so long, that it just kind of inherently limits who we perceive ourselves to be. If I begin to understand myself as eternal, that there is no such thing as hell, the hell is the state of mind that you carry around with you, and that I am eternal, then World War III doesn't mean shit to me, right? I become not limited to time and space.
So for you, I mean, what are the implications there for you in terms of like does that impact how you behave in the world in any way?
It more than anything, it impacts how I engage with like information in the world. Again, like, fear-based media and stuff. I still get caught up in it, but it's much easier for me to be like, that's nothing. That does not even matter. It also impacts it in a lot of different ways as well, though. Like, I have. Like, if I believe my experience, then, again, it opens up reciprocity, right? Like, then I engage with this thing differently, and I have started to, like, kind of, in some ways intuit, and in some ways have been directly told, like, just like the circle we just did, where I brought this into the circle, like, that was instructed, and so that changed absolutely. And it's not kind of like necessarily an aspect of infinity.
What do you think what's going on there? So, like, you were instructed, and what do you understand from that instruction, I guess? Like, what do you, if you had to make your best guess as to the goings-ons there?
Well, I was definitely giving an understanding to the best of my understanding. I was given an understanding of what that would contribute to. And I'm just going to kind of keep that there right now, because I don't think it's time to really share that. But for me, I guess as much as anything, like I feel more of an okayness with who I am, because I have wondered, like, why am I so fucking mushroomed out? Why can I not keep snakes? Like, I've tried to not keep snakes. Why is it that I can't? Why? Like, there's like things that happen in my life that have not been easily explainable until.
So where's the interest there? So why? I can understand having some kind of habit or inclination towards something and pondering, a little bit, why am I that way?
Mm-hmm.
So why snakes for you? So of all the things that you're into, or maybe, the habits you've carried through life, what's interesting to you about your relationship, like with snakes?
Well, I mean, I think there's multiple levels to look at that. I mean, I love, like I said earlier with the mushrooms, I love things that require discernment, so like when I was in second grade, I had learned all the native snakes to Kentucky so that I could tell which ones were poisonous and which ones weren't. And
do you still think there's things about the snake that can tell you about yourself that you haven't uncovered yet?
100%. I mean, that's like a big part of that fire trip with my buddy that turned into weirdness. Like, there was a whole like 6-hour course of events that people wouldn't believe me if I said it, so I'm not even going to go into it. But it then led me to a deeper understanding of kind of the symbolism of the serpent as it relates to humans. Connects back to not just DNA, but it connects to the what we call Kundalini energy, this healing energy that is like that. It's been displayed for a very long time as a serpent moving up, and then there is just the nature of the thing that, like, I'm seeing like several layers of understanding and application, right? So like from the base level of just like knowledge and information can preserve life. Then there is, how does the thing move in the world? Well, a snake, like, they are very opportunistic. They blend into the environment, there's a lot of like physical stuff that you can extract and understand how they move in the world and how to kind of interpret that or embody that. And then there is the more esoteric kind of interpretation that relates to this, the human energetic field and the healing powers and even like things like clairvoyancy and some of the stuff that we were talked about.
Do you have like I guess in your experience with coming to understand the snake, does it feel like back to the word progression or evolution of those layers, to where, maybe at the beginning, the relationship with the snake that you had, as far as your awareness at the time was concerned, was very physical and not the esoteric things. And then as time went on, those esoteric things started to bubble up into your awareness?
Yeah, for sure. And they are, kind of all equally relevant. I feel like, I still have a great appreciation just for the physical nature of the being itself, and also like it got pretty. There's a period when we moved back from Jamaica. Jamaica's, there's not very many snakes in Jamaica. I got to experience a couple down there. And before we went down there, I let all my snakes go. After there was a while, as I grew up in a herpetology was, very undeveloped when I was a kid. There was I was definitely the first person that anybody knew in my community that had a snake, and I would go hunt them and stuff all the time. But they were always like, kind of kept in just an aquarium and shitty environments or whatever. And I would keep them and then I'd feel guilty about it. And so then I started keeping, instead of keeping like pythons and exotic stuff, I started keeping native species that I could let go, once I started feeling guilty. And when I came back from Jamaica, I was like, I gotta get a snake. And I was like, but I gotta do it different this time. I can't. And so I started looking into different ways of keeping them, which led to bioactives, right? And so like,
where's this mindfulness coming from? This
that's what
concern and care.
No, I know, and that's what it eventually led to. And I told Courtney it was really, and this was before any of this kind of weird stuff started happening in the last year. I got these snakes right when we moved back. I got one right when we moved back, and I started looking into bioactives and creating natural environments for them where they weren't just like living in a shitty aquarium or whatever. And I built a great big enclosure for this snake to live in. It was like, I saw its nature. It lived differently than the other ones that I'd kept before. And I told Courtney one time, it was so weird, but I felt like, and again, this was before any of this stuff, skull stuff or anything stuff was happening. I felt like, I told her then, like, I felt like the spirit, like the archetype of the serpent, right, was happy with me. Like, I really felt like there was something, there was a being or a group of beings that were saying, okay, good job now, good job. And they're, like, again, I'm totally open to this being all a bunch of crazy subconscious stuff.
Yeah, right.
Like,
no, I mean,
totally okay. I don't know.
Things that are fun to think about and talk about.
100%.
Yeah.
But there has been a growing sense in me that taking better care of them and accommodating their nature is very pleasing to someone or something or someones that are behind the scenes.
Do you think that it's like directly connected to is it Thoth that you
I think I do think so.
Do you have anything outside of just kind of general intuition that points your mind in that direction that they are connected?
Well, the fact that like snakes have always been a part of my mushroom trips as well. But it always kind of got to this point and then stopped. And after a couple of years of this kind of keeping, that experience within the mushroom trip morphed, right? And then opened up to, now we're going to show you why they're always here. Before it was just like, they're just always there. And there would be so many times I'd be on mushrooms like, can the snakes just stop? Can they just fucking stop? You know what I mean?
Get it, snakes.
I get it. Now what? And then after a couple of years of different type of keeping and getting this sense that you're doing something right, then the phenomena of the experience started to shift. So that's all I got on that.
To kind of take the same, same idea or same model of a progression of understanding a snake and what you are and your experiences relationally to a snake. Have you thought about that in the same way with Thoth? And, what are you, in experience, what are you relationally to that entity?
Yeah, that's a good question. So are you familiar with the Zydor or the Church of Ambrosia out in California?
No.
There's a mushroom church out there run by a guy named David Hodges. They made the news. They had a big raid a few years back and stuff. And maybe you heard him there. I bumped into him, or actually I didn't bump into him. At the MAPS conference out in Colorado last year, I was being very intentional about following my intuition as to where to go next, because there was like so many things going on, and I was
Gotcha.
like, I can't decide, so I want to be guided. And there was this one talk that I listened to, and I sat there for a while, and then I just felt like it's time to go go here. And so I gotta go, and as I get out, I go, and there's David Hodges, and I see him like, hey, I've been wanting to say hi to you for a while, and introduce myself. And it was, I don't remember what indicated, but very quickly, I knew he was down to talk about some weird shit, and we started talking about weird stuff. And I shared all this with him because by that time, all of this had transpired, with the skull and everything. And he asked me a question that I had often wondered, but had never actually put into the form of a question. And so the kind of consideration being, okay, if I'm eternal, not in my body, obviously, but if there is some spark of me that survives and accumulates experience and wisdom, then that something must have a signifier, right? Just like an oak tree is an oak tree.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a thing that's eternal, then that it has to have like a name. And he asked me, he said, have you ever asked in the mushroom space what your name is? And I don't remember why. I think it was after the telling about the stuff. And and he's like, I don't mean like your earthly name. He's like, I mean, have you ever asked like what your eternal name is? And I was like, man, that's a really good question that I've been moving towards asking. I've never thought about it consciously, but I have pondered it in ways. And he was like, yeah, it's kind of interesting that, that you've done mushrooms as much as you have. This is one of the first things that they presented me with. I was like, well, I'm going to sit with that, And so I took it back and have sat with it and sat with it and sat with it. And finally did a little mushrooms around it. Didn't get anything like necessarily like right then and there, like in the mushroom space around it. But I sat and meditated with it more, and there was a point where it just kept coming back with truth. And he had told me that he had been, maybe I don't know if he wants to share that publicly, so I won't share it. But he had told me, and his name was not like, Johnny.
Charles.
Right. It was like a characteristic.
Yeah.
It was like an experience or something. And so and this even goes back to like the Psilocybin Says, where it comes from, is that I require a place where I can live my truth, where I can be absolutely true. And that has been so important to me from as early as I can remember, is truth. And of course, understanding that truth can be subjective, but always trying to get to the core, like what is, and I see that in you as well, like you're always trying to kind of filter down, like what's the base essence of this thing?
How fundamental
can we get?
Yeah, right.
And so I guess I've come to kind of experience that as kind of like an integral part of who I am. And that is so very much of what, if you dig into this character, Inky and Thoth, it's so very much of what it is a part of as well.
So this, these things you're talking about now, and this, I'm just going to use the word adventure that you find yourself on.
That's a good one, yeah.
Where is peace at you, or where is peace in relation to you with all this? So where does peace fit in?
That's a really good question. Because I was in a significant amount of turmoil over this. I was particularly in a lot of turmoil over my interpretation or belief in like the other world, right? And I feel like I've come to a much greater sense of peace that, I don't like per se know what's going on, but I have a whole lot more trust in what's going on, and so I'm so much more at peace with my snakes. Like I have zero, like I come down here at night and watch them crawl around, and I'm like, there's no part of me that's like, oh man, I'm really not treating them good enough.
Yeah.
I don't have any, like, with this whole otherworldly thing, like, I don't have the answers, but I'm like, yep, there's some other stuff going on there. And now, like, being able to read, like I said, the American Cosmic and some of these other stuff, scientists who have been, communicating with these intelligences, that's also brought me quite a bit of peace around it. Because I want to get to the most truth. I don't want to believe a lie. I don't want to believe a fantasy.
Do you think that in the pursuit of truth, it can get dark and scary sometimes?
Or do I know? Because that's like the truth is that it's all one thing.
So what does it look like to navigate that? You had mentioned like your light before, that you had a light that you leaned on typically when the waters would get choppy, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess trying to just like think about advice that you might have, or just thoughts you might have for folks out there that are also, pursuing, they're on some adventure that the truth seems to be what they're seeking. But
so I did a mushroom trip one time down in Jamaica. On the beach. One of the places that I used to work there was a very private beach on the side of fucking nowhere, Jamaica. Like there's nothing around. It's just out in the middle of nowhere. And I did a mushroom trip one night where it was just me and the fire. And it was nice, and I recognized how much comfort and strength and peace that I got from having that fire there. And I don't know what kind of triggered the thought, but a few days later, I decided that I was going to be the fire. That I was going to go down to that same beach on a new moon, no moonlight, and take whatever it was, 5-6 grams of mushrooms, and sit on that beach by myself in the dark the entire time and be the fire. And lately, there's a lot of talk about creating safe space. And I think that's really like this. It's a valid conversation. People definitely need like safe spaces where they can unpack their stuff. And what feels like the fundamental truth is that we are the safe space. It's like that book that we read on Sunday service, the Tenzin, whatever it was, that Buddhist Awakening Mind, where he talks about spaciousness and like at least getting to that place where spaciousness is the security, right? Where there's some other stuff to it as well. But anyway, basically that in the pursuit of truth and going through the darkness, we eventually come to understand that the truth is that we are the safe space. The truth is that we are the light, and that the darkness is there to help us understand that. And so, like even here right now, like this, now we can only talk about this stuff because we are willing to stand right in the middle of it. Like I could speak about all this in a very shaky, uncertain, unsafe kind of way. And it's not like my confidence in that this is what I think it is that makes it safe, right? It is our willingness to just be with whatever it is, to be okay with whatever it is. And I've learned that. So like I'm not to say that I would never be afraid by any means. Like sure, something can come. I mean, like we're in physical bodies. I want to stay in this physical body as long as I can.
Fear comes up. Yeah,
You know?
it's gonna happen.
Right. And at the same time, I feel like I have the potential to look death in the eyes and know that it's not real. Because I am safety. Right? I am eternal.
I feel like I've kind of already asked this question, but maybe not in direct relation with like these ideas or these feelings. How has that shaped your behavior in physical reality?
I'm not any bolder, like in terms of like taking risks or anything like that, I think it's relates to that peace that you talked about. I feel much more peace. I still struggle with like fear of losing loved ones. That comes up quite a bit for me because I'm finally in a loving, stable family.
Do you feel like you're able to communicate about those things better? So maybe the question rather is, as you've started to come into this peace, how has your ability to communicate grown?
I think it's nonverbal mostly. I feel like it's a presence that I bring. And what I have noticed is that you ever spend any time around, people who are talking about safe spaces and love and light, and yet they're just fucking terrified,
Yeah.
They're like so concerned about a safe space because they are completely unsafe themselves, right? Those people don't know what the fuck to do with me. And that's something that I'm trying to work on right now.
Can you just drill in there a little bit? Like,
Because
from your perception, how are you perceiving that?
Because my perception is that I feel so fucking safe in who I am and people being who they are, that like when I like lead circles or hold ceremonies, like I'm just like, you see me, like I'm not like we've got to like have a perimeter and we've got to like burn sage and we've got to do, I'm just like, what the fuck are you worried about? Eat some mushrooms, let's do it. You know what I mean? Or like, let's sit here in a circle and talk about whatever it is, because it's going to be okay. We're going to be able to talk about it together. But I feel like God, I don't want this to sound arrogant, because it's not coming from a place of like feeling like I'm better than anybody else or anything like that. But I think that my general sense of okayness with whatever is causes people who are pretending to be okay to feel very unokay, right? It's like recognizing that like you're living a facade. And that's like, God, I do feel like there have been like in my life, I just feel like I'm so fucking real that it intimidates people who are pretending to be real, if that makes sense. And again, I'm not trying to say that in any way, like I'm better than anybody else. I've got my shadows, I've got my dark spots, I've got my blind spots, there's a lot for me to learn, and there's always greater depths of truth, I believe, right? And so I've got plenty of digging to continue doing. But I've faced some pretty unsavory stuff about myself. I've faced like some really uncomfortable stuff, and have through that process gotten to a place of okayness with it, right?
Something I struggle with is this want to be real, and the question of there's moments of immediate self-reflection of, was that a real moment? So for you, how do you practice being real and check? I think it's worth checking ourselves.
100%.
Right. So
have to.
So what do you do? What do you do to check yourself, or how do you implement?
I mean, in a meeting today, I was just like, I very often like say what I'm thinking, and sometimes realize as I'm saying it that I don't believe what I'm saying. What? Hold up, back up. This isn't true actually, and like in this meeting today, kind of coming up against the reality that I tend to just like do whatever it is that needs to be done. Like, okay, we need a mushroom church. Well, then we're going to start a mushroom church we don't know how we're going to do it, right? We need a psilocybin retreat somewhere in the world. There needs to be psilocybin. Well, we're going to fucking do it. We're going to figure it out along the way. And like, there's value there. And the truth is that like that leaves a big fucking mess, And so for me to not acknowledge that, to pretend like, if I was to pretend like, look at me, I just make what I want, I do whatever I want. Like, it's true, I do what I want, and in doing that, you sometimes leave a wake that other people have to clean up. And so then I want to evaluate, okay, so is that how I have to operate? Just because I have a good idea, do I have to just like throw it out right now, or can it be like developed? So like there's one place where I would benefit significantly probably is but I don't know. I was gonna say like slowing down and not speaking until I'm like more sure of what I think, but I don't know that that's true, because for me anyway, my thought process and my understanding is kind of always evolving.
Yeah, and I struggle with the same kind of idea or the thought, and I guess back to the idea of like outside or external influence. So at what point in paying attention to when I'm holding my tongue or not, am I exerting some kind of influence that's really not my genuine self, right? Like there's a portion of a fear-based ego or whatever that is going to investigate that thought or sentence and put influence on it. And so where is that line to where I can tell that's not true discernment there. That's something different.
Yeah, for me it's in the tendency to be like, get the fuck out of my way. This thing has to be done, and like there's truth in that, but there's also ego in that. And so that finding that balance, like of where like either holding back or moving forward in a little more maybe a tempered way or a more considerate way is like, again, like we're, in my mind anyway, it's like it's all about getting closer to the truth. I don't know that we ever really get it. It's an approximation.
It seems like by design we're never going to get it.
Yeah.
It's just a part of how it's all.
Well, it's like the mushroom trip. Like you can globally grasp like all of this, but you can't like distill it down into a sentence.
No, yeah, it's confounding. And you're just kind of how you're talking about this, development of self in, it's. And we've just talked a lot in the last few days, even about communication and just how communication is super important, and the transfer of information, and just so much of this is also internal communication and how we're passing information. In ourselves, to make sense of things and to find a way forward. And then to your point of being the light, I just see you having like a campsite that you've set up, that you're now you've built the bonfire, you've pitched the tent, and you're building this space that is this place to operate from. And I guess my mind goes to, what if anything a responsibility comes up to help people pitch their tent or build their bonfire, right? Because it seems like your awareness is picking up on instances where folks they're talking the talk of love and light and safety, but their campsite is in shambles.
Mm-hmm.
So what if anything?
Well, I mean, I reflect back on that circle that whatever. I mean, I certainly felt attacked. I certainly felt like it was like attacked on me, and I think about what I could have done differently to help people just like feel better in that moment. Like, I tried really hard not to be defensive in that moment, but it was really hard not to feel like when you're being attacked, like not to try to defend yourself. And that's what I would like to do better, to kind of like the Course in Miracles talks about, to recognize that there's never an attack. Nothing is ever an attack. It's always an attack on ego. It's your ego that is feeling attacked, right? Like everything is working in your favor. But like that's so much of what this podcast is really about, and that's so much of what I've been speaking to this a little more directly. That even like all the work in Jamaica was about, my work with the mushroom farm, when I started Magnificent Mushrooms in 2009, is I really consciously try to be an example of following your excitement, of speaking your truth and not being afraid to modify that and realize, oh, I don't really know what I'm saying. I can like think about this differently, because we like, God, I think it stems a lot from growing up in this like uber polished family that just pretends like everything is good, and like it's so not fucking good. And I think if our family growing up would have been a little more real about what it was experiencing, that it would have had more potential to maintain its integrity. And so I see that a lot culturally. We've got so much social media and all the stuff that is like putting on a show of who we are. And so like I've been really intentional in talking about, the non-monogamy thing. Since I've come to understand that I am, I don't want to say definitely, but most likely I'm an undiagnosed BPD, borderline personality, which is excruciating. It's excruciating. I mean, this morning I just thought it takes nothing to send me off into, you should be dead. The world is better off without you. And I'm much better at having like that being like a 2-hour window rather than a 2-week window. And the only reason that is the case is because I've been willing to fucking talk about it, and even in talking about like the Thoth stuff and all this, like it's been empowering for me to see other individuals speaking about their, weird experiences. Yep. I mean, and so I just want to do the same for other people, and particularly as psychedelics become more mainstream and people are having these what the fuck experiences, and then like where do they go to share that and feel like they're actually safe and accepted?
Well, yeah, at least from my perspective, there is there's something about the expression of it, and that it's the expression of those weird things that come up and how we're interpreting them. That expression is just as important as the thing in and of itself that 100%. Was weird.
And maybe that's why maybe that's part of their manifestation is, maybe I'm being given these experiences because I am crazy enough to share them.
Right.
And something knows that and knows that it's going to empower other people. I mean, can you imagine a world that like a world of 8 billion people that's living a kind of shamanic life? Imagine how different our world would be if people were consciously communicating with the beyond.
Yeah, it's just, I guess where I get hung up here, because I do think, it's hard to not hard to not see the impacts in my life from, dipping my feet into weirdness and the positivity that has, arose from that. But at the same time, there's a part of me that just, all I can really know is this moment here and right now. And this moment here and right now is only possible because of the way things were set up. So as much as it sounds good that we could have this, situation of just a shamanic lifestyle as being how we exist as humans, I don't know. Like I just don't know. Like,
yeah, me either. I do know that we have a lot of suffering though, because people are forced to suppress who they are.
And so I guess a question I ask myself is it a matter of folks, not living as spiritually as they could be, or is it a matter of my perception not able to see spirituality in the way that it moves? If that makes sense.
Well, are they tied together?
Yeah, right.
Because again, like the more people are willing and able to live in that way, then the more it will empower others and it will shift the paradigm. I just again, I had such an incredible, fortunate experience working with so many people, and what I saw consistently is the most psychologically and psychically burdened people, like people who had the deepest depression, the schizophrenia, like those people were the most powerful healers that I have ever encountered. And so, we're feeding people SSRIs all day long and all these suppressants, and it's all good. Whatever is right now is all good. It's just like it should be. But that doesn't mean that it can't get better.
No, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, for sure.
And so that's what I want to see. I want to see me and more people just like loving themselves as they are. And like right now, I can sit back and say that, even my experience this morning was really challenging, that I love myself because of it. I love that I feel so deeply. I wouldn't feel that way if I wasn't able to talk about it, hear my wife reflect back her acceptance and her value of my intense feelings, and so just religion and the medical world has seemed to have really attempted to shut down a lot of that. Either you're crazy or you're going to hell, any number of things to prevent people from living authentically.
Do you think that it's like how much of a subset do you think that you're in, or a minority that you may be in, to have your mind in these places? Or do you think that humans, are we like at this point, on our story where this is coming up for a lot of folks and they're just not talking about it?
I mean, if you see like what's happening with UFO phenomenology and whatnot, yeah. And I think that we're also, I shouldn't say I think, but I suspect that we are also at a period where there's an actual uptick of this kind of melding of the two worlds, where maybe the invisible is becoming more visible, and that may be because of things like psychedelics coming more into our world. Maybe the psychedelics are coming more into our field of vision because there is a kind of a moving, like an evolving, whatever, humanity is evolving, and we're becoming more engaged with the unknown. I don't know if I feel like there's more of a dance than like a causation relationship,
Do you think that we've been here before? In the sense that, leaning into this eternity idea, and just also the seemingly cyclical nature of things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that this is the first time we've been here?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this stuff coming out about the pyramids and, and there's just seems to me pretty obviously like the stuff that we were told was myth, a whole lot of that was not myth, right? And so seems pretty likely to me that there have been periods like this, and that's why I don't necessarily scoff at it, but I question how realistic it is to think that Elon Musk is going to take us to Mars before whatever happens.
Right. Have you seen the Cybertruck? We're not going to. Totally not making it to Mars.
Not making it to Mars. Well, so, I mean, it's like all of our conversations. I don't know. We have many conversations.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
I know that we're on the same page
I
there.
don't know.
I guess the reason I asked, or part of the reason I asked that, or where my mind goes and thinking about that question of like how many these ideas that we're having and this conversation that we're having, how many times has it happened throughout history where the same kind of insights and concepts came up, different words and different ways to communicate it were being used, but it's fundamentally the same thing is being passed back and forth. And what, if anything, has prevented us from like innovating on that pattern, right? Like, there's just like the loops in the psychedelic space that you get into. Is there something about the way humans have been living and existing that has prevented us from innovating on this pattern and breaking out of it? And
I am curious and hopeful about that. Like I just because I say that the whole cataclysm thing, like all that, like I am actually hopeful that we're going to break out of this pattern, and if we believe what we've been told through sacred traditions, that we are a microcosm of the macrocosm, I absolutely see myself breaking out of patterns. Just like I said about the porn thing, that was something that was with me for fucking, I don't even know, like how old was I when I first saw porn? Like probably like maybe like 15, something like that. And it was 3 years ago that I like made like a break, so like 30 years. And
did you see growth in your life after that?
Oh my God. The way that God, there's so much that happened after that. And actually I didn't go back to that, but like when the Mars retrograde came around, right? It was the week after that Courtney and I entered into the relationship for over a year. My life just like got so fucking incredibly amazing, and a lot of that I truly believe energetically was tied to getting away from porn. And so like my relationship with the feminine, how I engage with and experience women in the world, and like the so much less objectification. It's been massive for me, and I just encourage anybody that is kind of struggling. And that's not to say that there's not like value or benefit there. I've had many conversations with folks about that. There's also a reality that like it is inextricably tied to human trafficking.
Oh yeah.
Period. So, and it's not like none of this. Anytime I want people to know that anytime in any of these podcasts where we're talking about lifestyle stuff and we're maybe like critiquing, it doesn't mean that we're like saying that something is like, absolutely wrong. It's always shades of gray.
Yeah, that's something that has come up for me really recently, is how important context is.
100%.
Context is just, and context is super important, and then also the understanding or the depth of context that we have, how does that correlate to the evolution of our communication, right? Like the more that we're able to contextually understand truth around us, like how much better do we get at communicating?
Here comes the circus.
I did, something that I think that we, or I intended to touch on that we never really kind of got back to, and you started off this podcast with it, is just kind of the intention for this show. And, I know that we've covered a wide range of topics at this point, but really, what are you trying to, what are you really trying to uncover with this show? And what kind of conversations are you looking to have? And where's your mind at there?
Yeah, I want to explore as many aspects of human lifestyle as possible. Speaking of context, I feel like we're not fully aware of how much the context of our lifestyle and our lifestyle habits and behaviors and patterns contribute to our sense of self, right? Just like the porn. When I was engaging with porn on a regular basis, I had a very different concept of self, right? And so if we can, in all these different parts of our lifestyle, move towards greater health, greater truth, greater light, then it's going to help us help each other. It's going to help us be better people, and that will encourage others. I want to really be able to dive into topics that people very often either are afraid of discussing or that they don't see connected to other aspects of their life. I mean, you don't think that, what weirdly comes to my mind is like the proscriptions in the Old Testament around clothing, right? Like you could only wear certain types of fabric or whatever, right? And like I think a lot of us kind of laugh at that stuff, but like if you're fucking wearing polyester and plastic, you're soaking plastic into your body, right? So like the depth in which we can explore every aspect of our lifestyle and how it implicates every other aspect or who we ultimately come to be is like, that's the human journey for me. Like I'm so interested in so many topics, but what I'm ultimately interested in is where they intersect. And that intersect, as I understand right now, is right here.
Maybe my last question. So you kind of are already hitting on it, but what do you think is intersecting for you right now? So where you're at on your path and in time and space, what are you intersecting with?
Letting go. I guess what I'm experiencing a lot with Sanctuary is like that dance of the illusion of not just control, but even influence. Right? It's like I've really been exploring this. And my nature is to create. I'm very much like bring things from the invisible into the visible world. And I just kind of thought that meant that I also had to like take care of them and continue. But I think that maybe more of my role with a lot of stuff is to like help bring it in and then let go of it. And even with Psilocybin Says, I haven't talked about this yet. Parasol is this kind of media network, podcast network. Hopefully it eventually becomes the kind of a media outlet for anything related to expanding consciousness. And this is the first time that I've gone into it with the intention of creating something that I will let go of. Like even Sanctuary, when it started, like I was like, all right, we started this thing. I'm gonna be, if not in the center, like part of the center for the foreseeable future. And maybe that'll be the case, and maybe it won't. But with the Parasol thing, like I'm intending on that being something that is a collaborative, and it feels much more true to my being,
For you, I mean, what is the most important thing in this moment for you to communicate about what psilocybin says and where you're at now with wanting to build something that leaves the nest, I guess.
Wow, there's like so many things that come up at one time.
Well, what's first? Like, what is your?
It's all good. Like, it's all good. Even when you don't think it's good, it's all good. That's one of the big things that continues to come up for me, is that just relax into it. It's all good. Even when it's not all good, it's all good. I don't know, like I feel like there is this sense of wanting to communicate that, you belong right where you are. That you don't know where you are. Like, you think you know where you are, but you don't know where you are. And that's okay. It's okay. Like, that being okay with not knowing, I feel like that's something that humanity stands to. And like, in knowing that we don't know is how we get to know more. It's how we get to learn more, right?
Yeah. The ideas of like faith and doubt and the importance of doubt, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
That it plays a huge role in the building blocks of faith and the evolution or the progression of our experience.
Yeah. And then trusting your experience, but then at the same time, that's like, there's a lot of times that our experience is lying to us too, right? So I don't know that that's, question your experience. Continue to question, never settle on this is the truth, even though like I'll say things like this is true or I know this, but like I don't really.
Yeah. How do you, we're gonna get into the weeds here again, this it does become difficult, I feel like, to communicate and not like to know in your heart of hearts that you're not sure of something, but there's not really language that you can use to not sound sure of something.
That's one of the biggest challenges that I have right now, I feel like, is that people want me to know. Like you're leading a circle or whatever, people want that sense of certainty. And Emil and his raspberries. And if you answer with a raspberry and that's the truth, then where does that leave everybody?
Oh man.
So it's that has been actually one of the greatest struggles that I've had in the last year, particularly, is people like wanting me to be the guy that knows. And the irony is that because I have like some of the most experience, then like I just don't know. That means I don't know.
Do you feel like you always struggled with this, or did this?
Oh no, I was very much, for a long time I was like, I know.
And these thoughts you've had around like influence, do you think that they've kind of tied with now some of this realization around like having to I guess, has your pondering influence on your experience trickled down into you being more mindful about the influence you might impart?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. For sure. I mean, I'm very much in camp, let somebody figure it out on their own, because that's how you learn. And so, like, I'll sometimes, like, I think influence can be really powerfully leveraged if your intention is to let someone discover on their own, right? And so like there's ways that we can like nudge an awareness or understanding, but not like give away the goods. And then when somebody gets it, they're like, oh, and then they don't even connect you to it. Hopefully that's the goal, right? Is that nobody even connects me to their expanded awareness. They just like, some pieces just keep kind of coming together. But yeah, no, I totally have been that guy that knows the answer. Thank God for mushrooms. And LSD.
Oh, we haven't even done, we haven't talked. Another podcast for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, I guess, the reason I'm asking that, it's just something that I've, can be difficult, at least in my experience, to have these profound moments or things that feel like pretty legitimate insight into truth, and to have this urge to give sound to them in some way or communicate them in some way, but then also to try to not in the way that I was given that insight. I don't want to get in the way of that happen for somebody else, right?
Right. Well, isn't that where questions become really valuable, right? And I see you do this a lot. Rather than telling someone what you think, you ask a question about the subject and allow it to kind of percolate.
And even there, 100%. I feel like that's at least where I've gotten as far as how do I try to communicate about this stuff. But even then, though, I struggle with how much. What, if any, difference is there if I'm still beating around the bush?
A leading question.
Yeah, right. And it's never. I try to make it not. I am intentional about the language that I use, but I try not to be intentional about where I'm, trying to get the mind to go. But
have you ever had an experience where someone says what you're thinking?
Oh yeah.
Well, then what? Now my thoughts are influencing.
Yeah, right. That's just a fun way to play with silence. We've talked a little bit. It's just, how. Really how similar are things going on, and if I can just remain silent, how long before it bubbles up and presents itself as from some other direction. That's just a fun game to play. Yeah,
I've been trying to kind of work with that in groups, like leading. I just I want to play more with silence and let.
But I feel like for you, like you said before, being in the role of the facilitator or the leader, that's got to be a hard bind to feel in sometimes, because I feel like some folks anticipate more direction or more
they want
hand holding.
They want you to tell. Like the mushroom ceremonies, like I know that there are people who are like, why isn't this more structured? And whatever, you may find more benefit in a place like that, but I tend to really feel like the organic, amorphous allows for a lot more like personal meaning. I'm just like, don't take my practices and apply them to yourself.
No, great point. And I think it's come up in a circle before too, this idea of imitation and having people in our lives that we can imitate, that we admire. But there is something about just back to your comfortable being yourself. There is something about getting away from imitation and finding your own rhythm in the way that you move through awareness. Back just being there, fine lines and context being really important, right?
Yeah, because imitating someone else can help you find yourself as well.
Right. Yeah. It's there are dots that connect back to self.
It's like so many times people have, particularly in Jamaica, but even in the sanctuary see it, but where people will see, like in Jamaica, people would see what's happening down there and they'd see me working and they'd be like, oh, that's what I need to do. Or even when I was having the mushroom farm, I'd be so excited and passionate talking about shiitake mushrooms or whatever, and people were like, oh my God, I need to do that now. It's like, no. You need, the passion is what you are attracted to. It's not the thing, right? So what do you feel passionate about? And maybe it is mushrooms or whatever it is, but probably not.
Yep.
There's probably, so anyway, it's I have no idea.
Agreed.
I have no idea. So what's psilocybin say to you, Alex?
Shit. I knew this question was coming. And so I did think about it, and I really, at least right now in this moment in time, or what my gut reaction to that question is, pay attention. Just pay attention.
I love McKenna used to say that, pay attention to attention.
Yeah, that's exactly you know, that's exactly it for me. For me, that's where a lot of magic happens, I think. So, and have you been asked that question? What does psilocybin say to you?
Yeah, at some point. Yeah, I mean, I guess right now it's the it's not necessarily I don't know, but it is more like enjoy the mystery. You know, because it's all a mystery. We just keep fucking putting microscopes on shit and pretending like we know, and then digging down deeper and realizing we don't.
Yeah, I feel like no matter where we look, something comes up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. This has been a fun little exploration.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Thank you for your time. This has been really cool.
Oh, man, thank you. Yeah, you made your way out here. Thank you all for sticking it through. I hope that you found this conversation, well, I hope it brought more questions than answers to you. Till next time.